All right, so even though Joe Biden and Kamala Harris pretty much want to give up on the fight for 15, Bernie Sanders, Chairman Bernie, has not given up the fight yet. So basically, just to give you a rundown of where exactly we are in the $15 minimum wage, the House passed their version of the $1.9 trillion COVID stimulus bill that Joe Biden proposed. The initial proposal that they passed does include the $15 minimum wage, and then the next question is basically, will it be included in the final version that's headed to the Senate? We have a couple different obstacles in the way, namely Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, some of these conservative Democrats that have been opposing the $15 minimum wage, and I've long been saying that it's on Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to apply maximum pressure on those people if they actually want to pass the $15 minimum wage. You might have to travel to their home states, you might have to campaign against them, you might have to threaten them or threaten their careers. But all of that is necessary and good to pass a policy that is overwhelmingly supported by the American people. A couple of polls that I've seen have been upwards of like 67 to 70% of the country supporting this policy. So it's overwhelmingly popular. It makes sense from a political standpoint. It makes sense from an economic standpoint in that it will lift tens of millions of American workers up in their wages. And Bernie Sanders is pushing back on this false notion that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and their team have been pushing, that somehow because the Senate parliamentarian advised them that it shouldn't be included in the $1.9 trillion stimulus package, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and their administration has essentially just been pretending as if that's the end of the fight, as if a parliamentarian who, by the way, Kamala Harris has 100% the ability to completely ignore, that somehow this Senate parliamentarian should get to decide that a $15 minimum wage should not be included in this version of the bill. It's absolutely weak. It's absolutely cowardice on their part. And it tells you that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris never really gave a shit about passing the $15 minimum wage. But Chairman Bernie Sanders actually does. And here's the statement that he put out to push back on this false narrative that has been coming out of the Joe Biden administration. So Sanders announces $15 minimum wage amendment to reconciliation bill, calls for Senate Democrats to ignore the parliamentarians. So this is what he basically said. U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, who, by the way, still has a higher favorability rating than Kamala and Joe Biden. I wonder why. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that he actually relentlessly fights for policy and they aren't. But he says on Monday issued the following statement that he will introduce an amendment to include an increase in the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2025 in the final reconciliation bill. Quote, this week, as part of the reconciliation bill, I will be offering an amendment to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour at a time when millions of workers are earning starvation wages, when the minimum wage has not been raised by Congress since 2007 and stands at a pathetic $7.25 an hour. It is time to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. Needless to say, I was extremely disappointed by the decision of the parliamentarian who ruled that the minimum wage provision was inconsistent with the Byrd rule and the reconciliation process, which is really bullshit. I mean, the explanation, basically the Byrd rule says that, like, if you're using the budget reconciliation process, everything in the bill has to be specifically pertinent and relevant to the budget, which the $15 minimum wage straight up is. I mean, it literally would affect budgetary matters, and so Bernie is kind of pushing back on that lie as well, but also pushing back on the idea that you even have to give a shit what the Senate parliamentarian has to say. And he says, but even more importantly, I regard it as absurd that the parliamentarian, a Senate staffer elected by no one, can prevent a wage increase for 32 million workers. My own personal view is that the Senate should ignore the parliamentarian's advice, which is wrong in a number of respects. I am not sure, however, that my view at this point is a majority view in the Democratic caucus. I kind of have an issue with what he's saying here, because he's saying that the Senate should ignore the parliamentarian. Bernie, you need to be calling out Kamala Harris by name. You need to be aggressively going out on every news station that will have you and say, Kamala Harris, you, Kamala Harris, as an individual, have the ability as the president of the Senate to completely go around this advice from the Senate parliamentarian. I talked about this in a previous video. She could fire the Senate parliamentarian or pressure to fire the Senate parliamentarian, but you don't even need to do that. You can just simply ignore the Senate parliamentarian, and then what would happen is anybody who objects to the $15 minimum wage or objects to Kamala Harris stepping in on this matter would then have to get together 60 votes to override Kamala Harris overriding the original Senate parliamentarian. So it basically wouldn't happen, okay? This can be included in the $15 can be included in the final version of the bill, and that is 100% up to Kamala Harris. So Bernie, you gotta call her out by name. And everybody else who actually cares about passing a $15 minimum wage, this is the moment. This is it. I mean, there's not going to be an easier time in the future. As Bernie Sanders points out here, obviously, as soon as we can, we must also end the filibuster that currently exists in the U.S. Senate. Given the enormous crisis facing working families today, we cannot allow a minority of the Senate to obstruct what the vast majority of the American people want and need. So you have two different issues that he's talking about here. He's talking about, should the $15 minimum wage be included in the final version of the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, which, yes, it absolutely can, and yes, it absolutely should, regardless of what the fucking Senate parliamentarian says. Nobody gives a shit. Nobody. None of the voters who voted for you because you promised a $15 minimum wage. None of those 32 million workers that would benefit from the $15 minimum wage, which, by the way, it wouldn't even just be to their benefit. It would benefit all workers across the country, because that then lifts up where your original bargaining standpoint for your own wage is, even if you're not making minimum wage. So it's something that's good for the entire economy, something that's good for the entire country, and it absolutely can and should be included in this bill. And that 100% in this moment falls on the shoulders of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, who basically all they have to do is not bail and not do what they're doing right now in using the Senate parliamentarian as a scapegoat. It's the weakest scapegoat of all time. To come out and pretend as if like, oh, well, we just really respect the processes. We really respect the Senate processes and all the hits. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about how you pass the bill. Nobody cares about how you pass this overwhelmingly popular policy. The negative implications that will come from bailing on this campaign promise will significantly be worse than the negative consequences that would come from ignoring the Senate parliamentarian. Nobody even knew who that was a week ago. Okay, so ignore them. This isn't complicated. And again, what this tells you is Joe Biden never intended to pass the $15 minimum wage, because as Bernie's pointing out here, Democrats don't want to abolish the filibuster. They need to abolish the filibuster if they want to get anything passed. But as of right now, it doesn't look like they're going to. And if they're not going to abolish the filibuster, and you're not going to include the $15 in this package through budget reconciliation so that you only need 50 votes for it, then guess what? You're giving up the fight on the $15 minimum wage. You're giving it up. If you don't want to abolish the filibuster and you don't want to include it in this package, that's what they're telling you clear as day. They don't care about passing the $15 minimum wage. So good for Bernie for calling them out on this issue. I really, really wish that him and the squad and other progressives who care about this would directly call out Kamala Harris by name. That's what I think is going to be important. We're in real crunch time right now. Unemployment benefits are expiring in a couple weeks through like mid-March. So this bill has to be passed in the next couple of weeks. And if you really want the $15 minimum wage to get in, to get included into the bill, then you got to act quickly. You got to act right now, and you have to aggressively demand that Kamala Harris ignore the Senate parliamentarian, and then you have to aggressively demand that all of these conservative Democrats fall in line, just like you tell the progressives to do all the fucking time.